Welcome to season 2 of the Foundation series, where we're jumping into the book of Exodus. As we learned from last time in the book of Genesis, we see as Jacob, or Israel, and his family, specifically his 12 sons, move into Egypt, and specifically the area of Goshen. Now, we see that there are about 70 people in total with all of these families added up, but we're going to see pretty quickly how that changes in the book of Exodus. As we know from our earlier conversations with Yahweh through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we see that these people are meant to multiply, and that's just what they do. Over several years, people think between 300 and 450 years, these people multiply in the land of Egypt. But this is over a long period of time. It's so much so that the people of Egypt forget about the past with Israel and how they got there in the first place. But over that long period of time, really, this is what forms the nation of Israel that we know today. It's not just a family group of less than 100 people anymore. Now it could be in the hundreds of thousands or even millions, some people think. Over this long period of time, there are new leaders and new leadership that takes place. Just like we forget our history, they forgot theirs. And so this new Pharaoh during this time begins to become afraid of the Israelite people, thinking that they will rise up to be such a great nation that they'll be able to rival that of Egypt. So their first solution to this was to be very ruthless to them, to be very harsh and give them heavy burdens. However, this didn't really work, and the Israelites continued to populate and grow more and more and more. So then they came up with a second plan that was two-pronged. The first would be that they enslave all of the Israelites, put them into slavery, make them work for them, and take away their freedom completely so that they don't have the option of continuing to grow as a nation and become sovereign unto themselves. Then a second part of this plan was to destroy them being able to populate in the first place by killing off every single boy that was born. Specifically, the king of Egypt tried to have the Hebrew midwives perform this task by killing all the boys and allowing the daughters to live. However, this didn't really work because obviously they didn't want to do this, and they came up with an excuse as to why they couldn't. They said that the Hebrew women were just too vigorous in giving birth, and so they would give birth before the midwives had a chance to arrive. This section of scripture is actually really interesting to me, especially when it comes to Pharaoh. Now, he is obviously trying to control the Israelite people by enslaving them, but he's also trying to kill their next generation in secret so they don't rise up against him. He's asking the midwives to basically secretly kill these children and just say, oh no, it was an accident or something happened during the birth. But in actuality, he's trying to take out the whole next generation of Israelites so they can't procreate as fast. But when this doesn't work and the midwives don't cooperate with him, he just puts out a straight edict across everybody to kill every single boy that the Hebrews have and throw them into the Nile. Then here in chapter 2 is where we get to the main character of the book of Exodus, and pretty much the most important character in all of Judaism, and that is Moses. Chapter 2 starts out telling us who Moses' parents are, and very specifically it tells us that they were both from the tribe of Levi. Why is this important? Well, we're going to find out a little bit later on that the tribe of Levi is actually the priestly tribe. The tribe of Levi is the only ones that can actually do things in the temple later on, and that becomes really, really important with how they worship God and how they interact with God overall. So Moses, being a Levite or a priest, is really, really important to the story of who Moses is overall, so keep that in mind. As Moses is born, his mother actually tries to hide him, as obviously the Egyptian people are now trying to kill every male that's born. She's successful for about 3 months, but then after that point, she realizes there's no way that she can hide her son anymore. And the only way to save him or her family is to put him in the Nile. Now, she doesn't throw him into the Nile like the other people have been for the other boys, but she creates a small boat out of papyrus reeds and puts pitch and tar on the bottom of it in order for it to float in the Nile. Now, here is where we see God appear in Moses' life for the first time. We see as Pharaoh's daughter is actually bathing in the river, and she sees a basket on the side of it. As she opens up the basket, she sees Moses and actually takes pity on him and wants to take care of this little baby, even though she knows that he's a Hebrew. This is where Moses' big sister comes into play. She's actually the hero of the story right here. We see as she runs up to Pharaoh's daughter and asks if she could find a Hebrew nurse to take care of that baby for her. Pharaoh's daughter agrees, and the little girl is able to go get her mom to go take care of this baby. So the woman who just gave up her baby thinking that he was going to die is now raising her child yet again, just for somebody else. Then when he's a bit older, we're not exactly sure how long this is, but I assume it means when he's weaned off of breast milk, the Pharaoh's daughter actually takes him as her own son and begins to train him in Egyptian culture. She also gives him the name Moses, which means to pull out or to draw out, because she drew him out of the water. I love Moses' name here as well because obviously God has control in these situations, and God has pulled him out of the danger that he was in, pulled him out of the Hebrew people in order to be a chosen person for this generation. Then after this point, we kind of fast forward in time. At this point, the Israelites have been enslaved for several years and all of Moses' life. But as he's walking around one day, he sees as an Egyptian is beating a Hebrew. He really does not like this. After the beating takes place, he looks around to make sure nobody sees, and he actually kills the Egyptian. And then afterwards, hiding his body in the sand. Later the next day, he actually hears some Hebrews talking about him, and they ask if they're going to be killed just like the Egyptian he killed yesterday. And this scares Moses because now everybody knows his secret, and he immediately runs out of Egypt, leaving everyone behind. And soon enough, Pharaoh finds out about this and seeks to kill Moses, but Moses has already left. Moses runs very far east to the land of Midian, where he runs into a Midianite priest's family. The priest's 7 daughters were actually trying to water his flock when they were being attacked by a group of shepherds. Moses actually saves them from this group of shepherds and then is able to water the flock himself. This really impresses their father, named Jethro. Now, Jethro is the main name that we call him, but he's also referred to in this chapter first as Reuel, which means friend of God. There are many theories as to who Jethro actually is, since he's a priest of Midian. Does that mean that he's a pagan priest, or does that mean that he's a priest of God that happens to be in Midian? And the name Reuel, friend of God, would seem to insinuate that he is a believer in Yahweh, but we don't really know. But the Bible also does tell us that we can see where people sit by their fruit. And Jethro, throughout the entire Bible, really seems like a great guy and gives amazing advice to Moses and really helps to begin the nation of Israel on a good foot. Regardless of that, we see as Jethro hears about this heroic deed that Moses did through his daughters. And then he invites Moses back to his home to eat a meal. And he ends up staying there for a very long time. So much so that Jethro actually gives him one of his daughters, Zipporah, and they end up getting married and having children. And then Moses stays here for 40 years. Now, I say 40 years, but how do I actually know that, since it doesn't say that here in the book of Exodus? Well, like the Bible always does, it gives us clarity in other places as well. If we fast forward a long ways to Acts chapter 7, we actually see that Stephen tells us this. We see in verse 23 and 24 that when Moses visited the Israelites and saw his brothers being harmed, that he was 40 years old. That's when he committed the murder. But later on in verse 30, we see that it's another 40 years before he encounters something called the burning bush, which we're going to talk about next time. So at this point, when we're ending the first portion of Moses' story, he is 80 years old. Keep that in mind. But during these 40 years in Midian, as Moses is living his new life, the Israelites begin to cry out to God because they are hurting and weary. And God remembers his promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he begins a plan to save them. And that's where we'll pick up next time. If you like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps out our channel. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Foundation series.